We live in a democracy, which Democrats often forget when it's convenient to do so. And many people just don't put two and two together. Since we live in a democracy, the opposition party in our system has full access to our secrets and to our intelligence through the intelligence oversight committees of the Senate and the House. We have civilian control of all these institutions. John Kerry sat on the Intelligence Committee. He saw everything, had access to every piece of intelligence that George Bush did. So the Democratic leadership as a whole, because they all know this, deliberately and collectively lied so that they could accuse the President of the United States and the commander of our forces in Iraq, our men and women in harm's way, could accuse him of being a malicious, evil, criminal conspirator to get Americans killed for and Iraqis killed for no reason, to attack a nation that was no threat. In other words, the Democratic Party leadership, and I'm not talking about the Cindy Sheehans and the Michael Moores and other marginal quasi-lunatic figures in our society. I'm talking about the leadership of the Democratic Party, people who will be the Democratic candidate for president and could be president of the United States. They conducted a campaign beginning in July 2003 to attack the United States and its commander-in-chief as an aggressor nation, as a criminal nation. Because that is what the Democrat attacks mean. If Saddam Hussein was no threat, if there was no justification for the war, if it was done unilaterally without any international sanction, then the United States is a criminal aggressor in the war in Iraq. That is the position of the Democratic Party. That is a national disgrace, and it is unprecedented in our history. Never before in the history of the United States when we were at war with a foreign adversary, has a major political party said that we were the bad guy, that we are the criminal actor and the criminal power. There is, of course, one exception, which was the revolution itself, where the Tories sided with England. But that was actually before the United States was a nation. Never since we have become a nation has this ever happened in our history. And there is a deafening silence about it. It's the elephant in the room that nobody really wants to confront. The Democrats, for those of you who've forgotten the lineage or the timeline here, we went into Iraq in March 2003. We liberated Baghdad in April 2003 with 139 casualties, although Nancy Pelosi was already saying that the war cost too much. And it was July, that's 3 months or so after we liberated Baghdad, when we were winning the war, but when the resistance was starting from the al-Qaeda terrorists and the Ba'athist fascists in Iraq, and our young men and women were in harm's way, that the Democratic Party ran a national ad, and the national TV ad, and the TV ad said, "Read his lips, President Bush deceives the American people. President Bush is a war criminal." That's what that was saying. What happened in Iraq between April and July, or what change was there in American policy between April and July? There was none. And I will come to the WMDs in a bit, but for all the Democratic Party knew at that point, the WMDs, that there were vast stockpiles of nuclear and chemical weapons in Iraq. But the Democratic Party went on a scorched earth campaign to tar the commander-in-chief of our troops a liar, and essentially a traitor, and actually Al Gore. It's funny how the Democrats always project onto Republicans what they do. George Bush did not say Al Gore was a traitor, or any Democrat. But Al Gore said that about George Bush in this first year of the war. He betrayed us, he screamed. What changed between April and July? Well, actually, nothing changed in Iraq, and nothing changed in American policy to warrant such a reversal. What changed was that a candidate of the far left in the Democratic Party, you'll remember, had a presidential primary at this time, named Howard Dean, who had taken the same position in Vietnam when the United States was forced to withdraw by people like Howard Dean and John Kerry and the anti-war movement, and 2.5 million Indochinese were slaughtered by the communists as a result of our withdrawal. Howard Dean was getting 45% in the MoveOn.org poll, and John Kerry and John Edwards looked at that and said, we better get on the anti-war bandwagon. Now, there are many politicians don't have the highest kind of reputation or regard, although there are some good people in politics. But I can't think of anything lower than selling your country out, selling your young men and women who are on the battlefield out, selling the security of 300 million Americans out because you wanted to win a Democratic presidential primary. There were 2 Democrats who were statesmen in that campaign and who stayed with what they knew to be true, which was that Saddam Hussein was a threat and that what the United States did was right and moral, and that is Dick Gephardt and Joe Lieberman. Dick Gephardt is now retired, and Joe Lieberman has been driven out of his own party. The basis for the accusation that George Bush lied was 16 words in the State of the Union of 2003. This was just 2 months before the war, in which he said, and this is practically verbatim, the British have reported that Iraq was seeking yellow cake uranium, that's fissionable uranium, in Niger. Niger happens to have 2 exports. One is chickpeas and the other is fissionable uranium. The 16 words, Bush was accused of lying about this by a renegade CIA officer named Valerie Plame and her husband, Joseph Wilson, who have been exposed as liars since. But the words were 100% true, because all George Bush said was that the British have reported this, and the British maintained, never wavered from their position that Saddam Hussein was seeking the uranium. And in fact, there were 2 bipartisan commissions, one a bipartisan Senate commission in the United States, and the other the Butler Commission in England, which investigated this whole story and Joseph Wilson's claims and found that Bush was accurate, and it was a well-founded claim that Saddam Hussein sought fissionable uranium in Niger. But even Bill Clinton at the time, in July 2003, said this is nothing to have a political war over while our troops are in harm's way, because intelligence issues, there's always a cloud around them, as everybody knows. Now let's look at a couple of these lies that the Democratic Party have based their campaign against America, against the American people, against the Iraqi people, and against the war on terror, which I prefer to call the war to defend ourselves against the Islamo-fascist crusade against us. The first is that Iraq is no threat, or was no threat.